Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We had our kickoff yesterday for Get Your Mental Health in Motion. All week long, we're going to be having workshops, music, yoga, different physical activities that you can take part in. And on Saturday, we're doing the big fundraising event. It is a virtual choose your own adventure. So with anybody in your circle, please get out, be active, and help us raise money for the new Child and Youth Family Waiting Room that's going to be at the Community Health Hub. This morning we had Lisa from the Yoga House doing a great session, and she'll be here later in the week as well. So please come out for some yoga if you can. Today, though, we have a really great interactive session with Glenn Robitaille. And we'll be looking at family dynamics in times of crisis or uncertainty. And so this is going to be an interactive session. We have some people who sent in a few questions that we'll post in the chat. And you're welcome to turn on your video and microphone and ask a question. If you don't feel comfortable, you can also throw your questions in the chat and we'll make sure they get to Glenn. So Glenn Robitaille is our Director of Ethics and Spiritual Care here at Waypoint. And he also is part of the Structured Psychotherapy Program for North Simcoe Muskoka. He is a registered psychotherapist. He is an author. He is a master practitioner of clinical counseling, and he is a certified mental health first aid trainer. Glenn's resume is so long that as I'm trying to scan here to make sure I don't forget anything, it's going off the page. He is incredibly qualified in his personal life. Glenn has been married for 47 years and has 5 adult children and 10 grandchildren. So he is very well versed in what it's like to juggle the needs of diverse populations in terms of your kids, your grandkids, your spouse. So he is speaking from a level of expertise personally as well as professionally, and we are so lucky to have him here today. All of the proceeds from today's session are going to the Child and Youth Family Waiting Room at the Community Health Hub. This is a great new service that we will be providing. We have expanded our child and youth services in the community, and this waiting room is going to help youth and children who are accessing care. It's going to make people more comfortable, reduce anxiety. It's a space to play and feel comfortable while waiting for clinical care services. I am so tongue-tied today. Our goal for this session, fundraiser is $25,000. We are almost there. So thank you so much for everyone who's donated, sponsored, registered for this weekend. It really does go a long way. All of these sessions throughout the week are free. We're making them available to everyone. We are also recording them so that we can provide them outside of work hours for those who cannot attend during the day. So if you've missed one, don't worry, we will have them recorded. Today's session is actually sponsored by Midland Honda. Midland Honda has been a longtime sponsor of Mental Health in Motion, and we are so lucky to have them on board again this year. So thank you so much to Midland Honda. After lunch today, if you have a chance to pop over to Cafe Kitty Hawk, they're actually donating a portion of their sales to this fundraiser. So thank you so much to them. Cafe Kitty Hawk is new to Penetang Machine, opened just before the pandemic. So please show them your love and your support. We are very lucky to have them here in Penetang. Tonight, at 7 o'clock, we will have a musical special by the North Simcoe Youth Wellness Hub. So please come on out and check that out. And if you'd like to donate or register for Get Your Mental Health in Motion, please go to waypointcenter.ca. You can also check out our Facebook page, and you can click one of the links there to register or donate. So thank you so much for being here today. And I will turn it over to Glenn, who I sincerely hope will be less tongue-tied than I've been so far today. And Glenn, thank you for being here.
Thank you for that really kind introduction, Holly. And yes, I would like to have a interactive session today. So I'm going to share a few thoughts by way of introduction, some reflections around the impacts that this pandemic is having on families, some of which you may relate to, others you may not. But what I really am interested in doing is engaging on topics of interest to you and working together to discuss some solutions and some approaches that we can use to make life easier during this time. So I will start by sharing my screen. just a few slides, which I won't leave up for long, just long enough for me to get through some of these principles, and hopefully you will find them helpful. So as Holly was saying, I've been married for 48 years. I've got 5 adult children, 10 grandchildren. Family is very important to my wife and me. Uh, we have many of them scattered around the world. So I only have one of my adult children that actually lives in the area, and only 4 of my grandchildren. So some of them we haven't seen in a year other than through the medium that we're presently meeting or Zoom. I also have living in the area 2 aged parents, both in their late 80s. Haven't been able to see much of them until recently either, until vaccinations were available to them. And so throughout this time, my wife and I and our family members have been doing the responsible thing, which means that, again, we haven't seen each other very much at all. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. We've had to be creative to find other ways. So what we find during this is not sharing, is it? Are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Usually there's a green box around it and I'm not seeing that, so that made me question. But some of the challenges that we face, first of all, we spend a lot of time with certain people. I was reading today an article in the CBC that said that lawyers were making money hand over fist because divorces are so way up during the pandemic. Uh, Being together for such extended periods of time has placed a lot of pressure on some relationships, some that didn't know they had cracks, and others that had some significant issues prior to that that have been exacerbated for sure by what's going on, the forced closeness and the limited options available. And then, of course, the other challenge is we're not getting to see other people, the ones that we would like to see, our family members, our friends. So both those are putting pressures. Now, the challenges are different for those two things. For those of us who are spending a lot of time together with uh, the individuals within our own household, we've all heard the saying, familiarity breeds contempt, and that certainly is possible. Uh, Being together for extended periods of time do seem to allow the little niggling things that maybe we would overlook in the past to mount up and to become something more significant. People have described it to be like water torture. It's like this constant dripping of irritation. I have to say, my wife and I have seen it almost like a second honeymoon. We've been married so long, all of our issues were resolved a long time ago, so we haven't had to deal with that much. But I can say, as a counselor, other people are, and it is very challenging. And also, at the beginning, I think people were trying to be creative, trying to find different ways to connect, ways to do different things. But as this pandemic extends and TV watching becomes more boring, and you can only read so many books, and you've done all the puzzles and all of those things, it does start to place challenges on how we can creatively find different ways to connect and find meaning while we're in this time. Not spending time together has other challenges, like missing out on a lot of important stuff. And I want to say, for those of you who have high schoolers, if any of you do have kids in high school, I just want you to imagine what it would be like to miss a full year and maybe more of that most significant time in your life, time you'll never get back. Um, and missing the opportunity to make foolish mistakes that you'll regret and be glad you made. All of those things that come with being a teenager that are being limited this time. Uh, there are aspects of what our grade school kids are missing that isn't going to come back. So we're missing out on a lot of important stuff. And that's one of the challenges that come with having to be in uh, a stay-at-home order as we are now. We find that absence may or may not make the heart grow fonder. In some cases, being separated from people does ramp that up. That isn't always the case, but sometimes it does. And so out of sight, out of mind is the other side of that axiom. On the one hand, absence makes the heart grow fonder. The other one, out of sight, out of mind. And both are possible depending on how we cope. And so creativity is required there as well to make sure that we're finding ways to connect with the people that we don't get to see all the time. So I'd like to give 6 suggestions for those of you who are home, particularly you who are parents. And I'll preface that by saying, and you're going to say, yeah, this sounds really weird. And yeah, I was a weird kid. So I will admit I wasn't your typical young person. I was pretty intense about certain things. And one of the things I was intense about was understanding what it was that made some families function really, really well and others not function very well. It was a curiosity to me. So at the age of 17, I began an informal study where I would interview people, young people, parents, and I would ask them what it was about their family that worked, what it was that didn't work. And what I was doing with that information is coming up with principles that I could apply to my own parenting when that day came, to make sure that I was doing it in a way that was going to be helpful and meaningful. And during this time, I think these principles are really important as a help to us to know how we can support our kids and how to be within our own families. So these are actually in order of the number of times I heard them. And so the first principle that we can practice is consistency. And what I meant by that was who I say I am and who I actually am are in synchrony. So the words that I use to describe who I am and what I actually do are very important. And there needs to be a consistency between what my persona is and what I actually am. Now, since nobody can be 100% consistent, honesty is the other most mentioned quality. So, I mean, everyone screws up. Not admitting it when you screw up can create huge problems. Whereas sometimes if you're able to apologize and take ownership for your faux pas, it actually improves the relationship. I can honestly say that there were times when I had to apologize to my kids when they were younger, where I walked out of that mistake in much better relationship with them than I was prior. Because I mean, I want you to think about the power there is for a young person when someone who they see as having more authority humbles themselves, makes them important enough to say, I screwed up. You didn't deserve that. I am sorry. Think about that in terms of the way that we engage with patients. If you happen to work here at Waypoint, if you mess up with one of the patients, actually taking ownership of that and apologizing has a very powerful impact. So if we can't be 100% consistent, then we do need to be 100% honest. We can't always control how other people are reacting to us. We can always control how we respond to that. And that's where this honesty piece comes in and why it's so important. Thirdly, affection. Everybody needs to know they're loved. And it's not just saying I love you, and I love you is very important, but people receive that information in different ways. I'll give you one example. You know, I'm very verbal. I easily tell everyone how I feel about them. My kids, my wife. My wife said if uh, the way she knows I love her is if when she comes down in the morning, I've got the dishes unloaded and they're all into the cupboards. Now, I would never have known that if she didn't tell me. It was something that I occasionally did. Once I learned that, I do it every day. But people have a way of feeling loved. We need to know that how that works within our own families and make sure that the way we're expressing it matches that. And touch is very important. You know, I would say hugging is very important, particularly within your own homes. For those who are less comfortable with that, you know, pats on the shoulder, rubbing the hair, things like that, all significant ways of expressing affection. And uh, again, affection is very important. If we're not being consistent and we're not being honest, it has less of an impact. So if you want affection to be delivered in a way that is receivable, consistency and honesty are very important. Fourthly, discipline. Discipline has to be done in a way that is just. I used to use well, two principles when it came to discipline, particularly with, you know, with younger kids. If I couldn't give a good reason why it was wrong, then it's not wrong. It's not wrong because I say so or because it's something I feel. There's got to be a legitimate reason for why. And secondly, if I'm going to use a form of discipline, I have to make it an event. It's not something that happens off the cuff. If what they're seeing is my offendedness and not my concern for them, it's going to miss the mark. So by making it an event, I mean, sometimes you say, let's let this sit for about 10 minutes and let's have a chat. But when you do, you're giving them eye contact and proximity. You're staying focused on what they need, not on what you feel. Uh, those are all important things if you're going to be providing comeuppance and discipline. And as you know, if you have younger children and you're living together 24 hours a day and they're not going to school, and the opportunities for irritation and for things that require a little bit of response from a parent, some accountability, are going to increase. And we want to make sure that when that happens, it's not because it's something we need. It's got to be something that's important for them. Secondly, I mean, fourthly or fifthly, I should say, love your partner. The climate of the home improves when those who are in the home know that the parents actually care for one another. It can really suck the energy out of a house really quickly if we're constantly at each other. And again, in times like this, we know from the way what's being reported that tensions within the home are occurring more frequently because of the close proximity so often and for so long. So talk about that with each other. If you do need to have conversations, don't do it in front of them. Work out your issues separate from them. What they need to see is a close connection, because with them, if they don't sense a close connection between us as partners, they're going to question the close connection between us and them as well. Kids personalize everything. That's important to know. And finally, communication. And by communication, I don't just mean talking to them, having meaningful conversations. The way I did this when my kids were young is I read to them every night. I always read to them. And I never just read a story. I would come up with questions about that story so that they would be listening so they could answer the questions. They wanted to do that. Um, when they were older and they were teenagers, I made the rule, this is not something I can control any longer. So if one of my teenage kids or my college students came home and they wanted to talk to me at 2 in the morning, I was up. I'll take the time that's given me. I'm not going to miss the opportunities when my uh, involvement is wanted. So finding ways to do that to make sure that we're communicating in ways that are meaningful to them. So I'll just stop there before I go to the last slide, and just see if there are any comments or questions about these 6 things, these 6 qualities of positive emotion.
I could make a comment
Okay.
about affection. I did not grow up in a home myself where affection was expressed physically with a hug or any touch.
Yeah.
And so I raised my 2 children without that. Now, as an adult, I at least had a conversation with my son about the fact that it wasn't because I didn't want to, but explaining that it was how I was raised. And I don't know if that's sufficient, but I didn't uh, get to the change within myself. And now the kids are adults.
Yeah. You're making a very important point. Um, I like to focus on what is controllable. So what happened in the past, I can't control. What I can control is, once I know something, I can control what I do now. So it really does not matter when you start. When you recognize and realize that uh, it was difficult to receive affection because you didn't receive it. If you didn't receive it, it's hard to give it because the learning wasn't there. We know attachment issues begin really, really early in life, as early as like 3 months, and they have an impact throughout the whole lifespan. So all you can do is start a new baseline. It's like
And so my question would be,
yeah.
sorry,
Mhm.
my question would be, would my having expressed that verbally made any, if even the smallest positive step?
Let me put it this way. It was a very positive step. It was a wonderful step. You only have control over taking that step. How they actually respond to that, I can't say. I don't know them. But let me say that your chances of building it in the future are much better having done that than they would be if you didn't. So, it's the controllable thing, right?
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
yeah. Mhm. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so then um, when it comes to uh, the frustrations that come with not being around the people we're normally around, these are just a few suggestions that work for me. You can probably think of others. I'm sure that others who would do presentations such as this would put together a list maybe similar but different than mine. But one of the important things for me is the idea of delaying gratification. Uh, in fact, they say one of the signs of higher intelligence is the ability to delay gratification. If you have to get an immediate payoff, that ends up compromising long-term success in a lot of things in life. So um, rather than meeting the immediate impulse, try to delay that by stepping back and thinking about it. And so that can apply to just about anything, whether you're going to go to that event where people are in close proximity and not wearing masks, if you're thinking in terms of infection control, whether or not you're going to eat emotionally. And I know that's a real challenge throughout this, or actually check to see whether or not you're hungry. Uh, Delaying gratification is an important step in staying healthy, making sure that we're making choices with our heads and not just with other parts of our body that are asking for attention. There's also a difference between what is best and what is good. So I don't believe that anyone needs to be perfect. In fact, there's a certain amount of um, quality of life that comes from imperfection. Now, those of you who read the things I write will know I just wrote about that recently. Perfection is not the goal, uh, but uh, but when we can, deciding what is best is better than doing that which is good. And that's one of the questions we can ask ourselves when we're about to make a decision. I think it's really important to find creative engagement strategies. Now, Zoom is the easy one, and or other versions of that, but there are other ways that we can connect as well. And uh, so, with my family, as an example, the ones that live in the area, we do meet in the driveway. We'll distance in the backyard. They'll bring their food, we'll bring ours. Uh, Ideas like that, finding ways to connect. I do that with my parents as well. So finding creative ways to engage with others, and taking satisfaction that this is what we can do right now, rather than focusing on that which we're not able to do. I was thinking about what Bill Murray did in the movie Groundhog Day when he had to live the same day over and over again. I'm sure you've heard this pandemic being described as Groundhog Day. The part of that that's meaningful is that he took the time during that to learn how to play the piano. Every day that he had to live over, he spent some of that learning how to play the piano. He learned how to ice sculpt. Uh, it's a bit of a lark in the movie. I'm sure that nobody's going to become that proficient. But the idea is if you have available time to you to do things that you would not have been able to do before, why not take advantage of that to do something that would take up, uh, that would better utilize that time and give you something at the end, whatever that is for you. I am a guitar player. I always like to play a little bit, but what I've been trying to do is improve in areas of my of my guitar playing that I haven't especially focused on in the past. So rather than just doing the same playing that I've always done for the last 45, 50 years, I'm trying to do something new. Be an encourager, not a complainer. Complaining is easy right now. When we're stressed, it's really easy to find the things that are irritating to us. I like to describe anger as the convenient emotion. It's the most accessible. It hitchhikes on other things like fear and guilt. And so complaining is I mean, we're almost biologically predisposed under times of stress to do it. So flipping that a bit and focusing on others and trying to find ways to encourage them will actually bring well-being to us. There's always a corresponding benefit that comes to us when someone else is encouraged by what we're saying. So make it a point to try and find ways to do that. And then finally, when people tell you that they're grateful, think about that, accept it. Don't let it just brush off your shoulder or like water off a duck's back. When someone says that something you said or you did uh, was meaningful to them, take the time to actually embrace and accept that gratitude. It helps to fill the tank a little bit. So those are just a few thoughts that I had that I wanted to share, just kind of by way of introduction. But as I mentioned earlier to Christy and to Holly and to Rebecca, I'd like it to be more like a radio program kind of setting where you can bring the things that are on your mind and we can talk about them. Okay, Holly, you've got a few questions then?
Yeah, I just, we had a few sent in advance. Sometimes it's nice to start with these just while people are kind of getting warmed up. It's my
Sure.
microwave beeping. So if anybody does have questions for other sessions too, you can always send an email to sprice@waypointcenter.ca and we'll make sure to include those questions. So the first one here actually references Groundhog Day. The pandemic can make you feel like you're living in a rut or in the movie Groundhog Day. This can be hard on families. What advice do you have for families trying to maintain a sense of adventure when options for recreation and socialization are so limited?
Well, as I was saying, I think that's a great question and it's a great challenge. Uh, what have you wanted to do that you haven't been able to do that this time together affords you now? I've got to say, for one, I've never made a puzzle in my life, ever. My wife and I don't do that. But my son did send us one from Toronto. He was saying that he and his wife are doing that. And we spent time together building this puzzle. It occupied hours of our time over a period of a few weeks. And making the puzzle is just one thing. It's the interaction you have while you're doing that as well, of course. That was the way that we applied it. Stretching and trying to find things to do that are different than what you would normally do because of the available time that we have. Others here may have other suggestions that are working for them around that. So I'm happy to share my thoughts, but if you have others as well, feel free to pipe in on these questions.
I painted the whole main floor of my house when the pandemic started. It took a few months and kept me very occupied, and the results were pleasing. So something to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of my home is renovated that wasn't before. Yeah.
My husband and I took to hiking. So every weekend we would pick a trail using an All Trails app, and we would find a new place to go. And it was a great shared experience for us.
That's really cool. Okay. Any other thoughts there? Okay. What else, Holly?
Okay, the next question is, how can I help my family when I'm feeling so burnt out and low?
Yeah. So I hear this one a lot. And it's, first of all, the longer this drags on, the more people are feeling that exact feeling. So I first want to say, if you're feeling that way, it's understandable. You're not, I mean, that's a very normal way for people to be feeling right now. Going back to what I said earlier, and this is a principle that I will reference often, and one of the most helpful things that we can keep in mind is always move to what we can control. Anxiety and all of the negative emotions basically flow from that which we cannot control. When we lie awake at night or when we're fussing about things, it's never the things we can control that we're fussing about. It's never the things that we can control that are dragging us down. It's the things we can't control. So the antidote to loss of control is always controlling that which we can. So the task is always to find something that we can control. Now here's the piece that is most important when it comes to burnout. Studies have been done that have basically said that burnout does not come from it comes from basically a failure to be able to appropriately show compassion. So compassion and actually giving of yourself when it's done in the right way actually energizes. Burnout comes when we try to distract ourselves, when when we become utilitarian, when we see the mountain piling up and we're trying to bring the mountain down. It's what this study basically said is that it just takes 40 seconds of actual compassionate caring to give a boost back to the person and improve their own mood. What the study was reviewing was how doctors were saying, and think about doctors in these times who are seeing a steady stream of people coming with their problems, what that would be doing to their well-being. And they're saying, I don't have time when I can see a patient for 2.5 minutes to be compassionate. I only have time to give them what they need. And what this study is saying is no, take the first 40 seconds of that study to actually see the person, express something to them of meaning, and that gives a boost back to your own well-being. So that's something I recognized immediately, because I know that when I was working more clinically, I was always more energized at the end of the day than I am when I'm not working clinically. And my wife would know the difference when I came home, whether I'd been with patients that day or not, simply because when I was with the patients, I was very clearly focused on trying to do something meaningful in that interaction. And I didn't stop to think that every time I had a meaningful interaction with a patient, that was actually giving something back to me in terms of my own well-being, but that was the outcome of it. So the one piece of advice that I can say that would be helpful when you're feeling burned out is, rather than withdrawing, try to focus more intentionally on the other person and trying to lift them up in some way, identifying what you're seeing in them that is meaningful. I think the more that our response to others flows through the lens of compassion, the better we'll end up feeling. So I found that to be true. How we apply it in our individual lives, I think we all have to do that, but that's one suggestion I would give.
That's great. Thank you so much, Glenn.
Yep.
I'm just scrolling back up here. I've lost it's not letting me see every question at once. Question 3. So how can we create some space or alone time when we are together all the time?
People do this in different ways. It really depends on personality. But even when you're together all the time, you can schedule time for different things. You don't have to be together all the time, and people have different needs around that. Having open conversations around what you do need and supporting each other's preferences is probably the approach to take. You can't generalize around this. Like, I know that when it comes to being with my wife, I'm fine if she's there all the time. And she's that same way as well. With my brother and sister-in-law, it's not that way at all. He needs his alone time, and she knows he needs his alone time, and she needs her alone time, and he knows that as well. So if you can just frame that out, this is when we're going to be together. This is when I'm going to be out in the garage working in my workshop or whatever the case may be. Uh, it's yours to schedule. I think that the important thing, if you're worried about creating tension in the relationship by withdrawing and someone feeling rejected, having open conversation around what each other needs would help with that. So the principle I like to use in terms of relationships, and I've shared this with every single person who's ever come to me for marriage or premarital counseling, when couples connect, the relationship can go either one of two ways. I can either make this relationship about you meeting my needs, or I can make this relationship around me meeting your needs. Now, when both people take that latter perspective, my role in this relationship is to ensure that you're getting what you need in order to be happy. If both people take that position with respect to the other, both people get their needs met, but it's not fighting for what you need. It's the other person knowing what you need and becoming your highest and best advocate. So when you have the conversation around what do you need, you do it from the perspective, I'm your partner, and I want to support what you need in order to be well during this time. What is that? And then if the other person takes the same perspective, both people get their needs met, and it's not a tug of war.
That's great advice. Thank you. All right. What advice do you have for families who normally get along but are now struggling because different family units have different interpretations of the COVID restrictions?
Yeah, I think it's, the thing with that is there are different losses being experienced. Like, yes, people are losing their lives, and that is really, the worst thing of all. People are dying in ways that they have not died before. People are losing family members to this. People staying healthy and well is of course, everyone would recognize that's critically important. It's not the only loss people are experiencing. And pain is not relative. Just because you've lost a family member, as an example, doesn't mean that losing my business hurts any less. It's not a relative kind of struggle or pain. Yes, I disagree with those who are standing out on the corners saying no more lockdowns and potentially spreading the virus. If I had the choice to make, that would not be occurring. I don't have that choice to make for them because my losses are different than them. I have a job, I'm getting a paycheck. I really have not experienced much financial pressure at all because of these things, while others have. So rather than arguing over what is right and wrong arguing rarely gets anybody anywhere. What we can do is try to appreciate the highest value the other person is placing in the conversation. So if someone is valuing, as an example, their very survival when this is done and the ability to maintain their business or whatever it is that they're valuing, if I'm then going to say, if I love you, what is it that you need from me in order to feel supported with that particular challenge? I'll get much further along with that individual if I approach it in that way. So yeah, I've had those discussions in my sphere of relationships as well, simply because people have different highest values, and that's what we need to appreciate.
Okay, so I think we have one right here. Having lost my father-in-law unexpectedly during the first lockdown and knowing many others who have lost someone during the pandemic, what are some ways we can support each other when you can't physically be together? How do you get the closure you need when you can't have a normal funeral or celebration of life?
Yeah, that is certainly one of the big challenges. The when I look at what's going on in India right now and people taking a number in order to line up to have cremation performed on one of their loved ones in a parking lot, and thinking about the the lack of opportunity people have to mourn together and how significant that is. Yeah, that's a challenge. What I will say is that not being able to do it now doesn't mean it's not going to be able to be done. So talking with your family about those feelings, coming up with a plan for how you can do it in a different way, maybe having some kind of remembrance in different households, as an example, happening simultaneously with the same ritual being done in different places. I had a relative die in the States, and doing a funeral over Zoom is an interesting experience, but it can be done. And of course, here at Waypoint, we are allowing people who are unable to see their loved ones actually see them through an iPad, and that's happening in hospitals all over the province. We have to be creative in our specific situations, and the needs, of course, change depending on who the people are and what they have found important in the past and what they're not able to do now that they could have done before. I realize that's a completely inadequate response, but that's the best I have.
I have a comment about that. I actually was able to participate in a funeral on YouTube, actually, and I thought it was a really nice thing for us to do. It was last summer, so I was able to get together with my sisters, and we may not have been able to go to the funeral, even if it was in person, because it was out of town, right? And so we have jobs and all of these things, and so it did allow us to be able to participate in a way that we may not have been able to before.
True.
And so it was really nice for us to do that. And I know it was an uncle of mine and several of my cousins actually, got together in our small little, 2 and 3 and 4 member families safely last summer outside. And I just brought my laptop out, and a number of us in town actually did that. And so, it's not the same as being in person, but at least we were able to participate in that way. So there are options. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, one funeral we attended with YouTube, one of the things that I think made everybody feel pretty connected was this friend of ours died very unexpectedly of a complication of juvenile diabetes. And in the end, everybody made donations towards a sick kids hospital focused on juvenile diabetes, and $20,000 was raised in his memory. And for us, we couldn't believe the impact of what seemed like a small community of people being able to so quickly raise so much money for something that took him so prematurely. It was really quite therapeutic for us to see that maybe that could make a difference and this doesn't have to happen again. So it was, I think, going back, Glenn, to some of the things you were talking about in terms of helping other people and sometimes the value of that in terms of what comes back to you, that was really quite an amazing thing. We didn't think it would raise nearly that much. And the ceremony itself was quite nice too, but yeah, it's not the same as the hugs and the physical contact you kind of need during those times.
Yeah. Okay, were there any other questions or comments?
I have a question, if you can hear me okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. I just have headphones and I wanted to be sure. It has to do with just talking to smaller age children and maybe some language to use. We and our family, both of us working in healthcare, definitely realized that we were struggling ourselves. And even noticed like our small young daughter, like suddenly wasn't like sleeping very well at night. And we started to notice some things. And we weren't sure how much to tell her about what was happening in the world, or even what was happening at home with like mom and dad, and why we were so tired and why we were, a bit more grumpy. So I think, just wondering about some tips and ways to speak to the young, like our young children, about the realities of what's happening, but also choosing some language that would be helpful for them to understand that it's okay, to help kind of set some communication patterns that'll help them out later, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it's a great question. We know that children pick up the energy of the mother in utero, and that they read the energy of the family without understanding any of the specific dynamics. We know that that's true. So what I've communicated in the past, and I'll use, since we were talking about funerals as an example, people would often tell me, you know, is it okay to bring my 5-year-old to this funeral when I know that I'm going to be very upset, and they're going to see people who are very upset? Is this emotionally damaging? And I always say, no, feel free to bring them. However, understand this: their emotion is cueing off you.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to tell them, listen, Mom is feeling pretty sad right now, but I'm okay. And sometimes sometimes people are sad and they have to be sad, and I'm a little sad right now, but I'm all right, and so are you. So it's important to communicate to them what they're feeling, and letting them know that you're all right, and letting them know that they're all right.
Mm-hmm.
So we generally will know what it is that they're picking up on, because we're the ones usually creating the energy. And so if the general energy of the home right now is that, you know, we're stressed because we've got these challenges, we can let the kids know things are a little harder than they normally are, but we're okay. We're going to solve it. This is ours to solve, not you. You're fine, right? So it's just being honest about what you're feeling, because that's what kids are going to pick up on. They don't have pure emotions of their own at that age when it comes to these things. They are cueing off us. So getting into this piece where you're honestly expressing what's going on in you is very helpful to them, if you can make evident what they're misinterpreting. The reason they had groups like rainbows, anyone not familiar with rainbows? It was a group for children. They would have facilitators that would work with children who had experienced a loss in the family, as an example, either through divorce or through death. And one of the roles of the facilitator was to normalize what was happening with the child. But one of the things you'll hear from each one of them is they all personalized it as though whatever happened in some way related to them. So relieving them of that burden is important, because they really have no other benchmark to use. If this is happening and I'm the center of the universe, then this must be emanating from me. So yeah, it's important to let them know what's going on with you, and letting them know they're okay, you're okay. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is. Thank you. And like, we certainly noticed when we talked about emotions and feelings, and how mommy and daddy were doing in words that we felt were age appropriate for her. Like, we did see a shift, and we continue to see that. I think you answered that perfectly. I think we're always just aware that, like, we want to be using language and that's just age appropriate for her, and just trying to be very mindful that we're not burdening her with things that are just kind of too big for her little brain. But I think we're doing okay with it.
Yeah. And so understanding the big picture, not so important. Understanding that you're okay, very important. So
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question about the dynamics between siblings in a household, now that we're all sort of stuck together here. We have 4 young children ourselves, and the youngest 2 are twins. The older 2 end up being kind of stuck together all the time. And while they would typically get along pretty well, we're noticing that as these lockdowns continue, the bickering, the fighting, everything is really, really starting to ramp up. They don't have the extracurriculars. They have their friends online, but in the interest of trying to limit some computer time, they end up spending a lot of time together. Especially with our oldest, not having other kids around that are her age, and then she's playing with all three of her younger siblings all the time. I guess my question is, do you have any tips and tricks on how to keep the peace? That'd be great.
Yeah. So again, if you move from the principle of making discipline an event, the what more often than not happens is the parent gets frustrated because the kids are frustrated, and correction starts being handed out. The more important issue when they're sparking in that way is to settle it down a bit and say, okay, what's going on? What is it that's going on with you that's causing you to feel this way? And actually talking it through. And then when you do that, you can then ask, how do you think your sibling is receiving this? When you said this, how do you think your sibling interpreted that? Or how did your sibling feel? How do you think he reacted? How would you feel if he had said that to you? So you use it as an opportunity to help build a little understanding, because kids, I don't know how old your kids are, but empathy does not evolve quickly in kids. In fact, scientifically, it doesn't fully form until the brain is completed sometime in our early 20s. So that's why kids are cruel. They're not cruel because they're necessarily bad. They just don't know any better because they have not yet developed the full capacity to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And so while they don't naturally possess that until their brain gets into further development, they can be taught that through some of those techniques where you actually ask them to stop, think, put themselves in the other person's shoes. So you can kind of force some empathy to occur that way. I will, if your kids are like mine, if you do that consistently, and they know every time they do that, they're going to have to sit down and have this conversation where they're putting themselves in the other person, they're not going to do it as much. And then they'll learn something along the way. So that is the approach that I used. The other one I would use as well, if it was one of those things that really, like, particularly when they were older, I'd put them in a room and I'd say, listen, I'm hearing different stories between the two of you. Go to this room. I want you to come out and tell me the same thing. I don't even care if it's the truth. But until you can come out and tell me the same story, you're going to stay in that room and work it out. So I put it on them. They have to work it out. And that was a good way to resolve. I don't want to be their referee. You're the ones who knew what happened. You know what went on. I don't know that. So you go in there. You guys decide on the story. And once you've got it settled, come and tell me and we'll go from there. But I'm not picking a winner. Sorry, not my job. Well, those are a couple that have worked with me.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to mention that Natalie West shared a resource in the chat. So if anybody's interested, there's a workbook that she shared on life lessons, and I think it's geared towards talking to kids. So if you
Great.
are interested, check out the resource in the chat. And Natalie, thanks for sharing that. And we do have a couple more minutes. So if anybody does have any more questions for Glenn, I know this has been very helpful just to listen to, and I think things you're not even aware you were looking for answers on have been answered. So this has been great, Glenn.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate all of you who logged on and participated in this today. That's great. Thank you.
Glenn, the one comment I've been hearing, it was on CBC, I believe. Somebody mentioned that one of the challenges in our relationships right now is typically we have this whole network of people that help fulfill various needs that we have, whereas right now, all of that pressure is being applied to a very small group of people, or in some cases, one other person. And it's at times more pressure than you would typically put on one person to try and support you in your life. So you're really downloading this whole roster of expectations on one person that makes it unbalanced and in many ways unlike a typical relationship you would have at a different time. So anyway, I thought that was interesting and certainly made me reevaluate my expectations in the household.
Mm-hmm. Sure, we've seen that commercial where it mentions that 1 in 5 people in Canada is actually providing long-term care to somebody. Have you seen that commercial? Yeah. It's a good commercial. It shows different people doing different things for those who require uh, home care of some kind. You know, aged parents, people with complex needs, and that's 20% of the population under normal circumstances is already doing that. And now the rest are finding out that, you know, a little bit of what that's like for sure.
Glenn, there is one more question. Just in terms of, we've spoken a lot about families, about people in relationships. For people who are single right now, trying to navigate this, who aren't in a relationship, you know, I think there are different challenges in the household that are a problem and different stresses that are present. So do you have any advice for people who are single right now, who are trying to navigate this maybe without a big support system at home?
Well, we're community, people are made for community. So finding ways to connect is everyone's challenge, but for those who are single, it becomes even more of a challenge. While some people have the challenge of getting along with the same person, others have the challenge of trying to find people with whom to get along, and not necessarily in forming romantic attachments. I mean, any kind of meaningful connection. Uh, I am not sure, other than, you know, my go-to has always been join a club, join a church, join a drama, you know, join around your players, do something that gets yourself around people. And that is more challenging in these times, but it still is the challenge. It's on me to expand. It's on me to expand my relationships, right?
Well, and I think I slightly misunderstood, but I think you got back to it anyway, because I think the question was more around how do you meet somebody? How do you start forming relationships in a time when you can't connect as easily because most things are online, and that's not always what people are looking for. So I think I misinterpreted the question slightly.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you one thing you don't do is you don't phone up that chat line that then eventually is going to charge you hundreds of dollars. There was a guy that I provided some I was a psychotherapist for a while when I was living in Ohio. Ran up $40,000 talking on those chat lines, which presented a whole other difficulty.
Well, maybe one of those losses that you were talking about in terms of people grieving different things, maybe that's another one that maybe isn't talked about quite as much, but the opportunity to form new friendships, romantic relationships is harder at this time as well. And maybe another thing that's been lost in the mix of this.
Yeah. You know, a tool that has served me well, and I'll just offer it for everyone. The best way to form relationships is to get other people talking about themselves. You know, people like to share about them and what they're doing. So rather than feeling like you have to, and often when people are less gregarious, you know, the thought of having to talk and maybe, you know, start talking about themselves and revealing parts of themselves they're not ready to reveal can be intimidating. Getting somebody else to do it is a far better solution. So it's a good way to start to get to know somebody is to keep probing with low intensity questions. That got me through my dating life in flying colors and many other relationships as well. It's also what a good psychotherapist will do.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Glenn. If anybody else has questions, you can always send them to the same email, sprice@waypointcenter.ca. Again, thank you to I believe today was Midland Honda for this one. I'm just going to
Yep.
double check that.
Midland Honda.
Thank you. So a big thanks to Midland Honda, longtime sponsor of this event. All of the workshops all week long are free. It's the same link. So the link you used right now, if you want to attend any of the others, it's the same link. And we will be posting the recorded videos afterwards. So if people haven't had a chance, we will have these posted so that people can hear the questions. I know shift work and different schedules make that very challenging. So we are trying to make it as accessible as possible. Thank you all for coming out. If you want to hear some music tonight, the Youth Wellness Hub is on deck at 7 tonight, and we'll have a musical session. So there's more yoga, more music, more workshops all week long. And on Saturday, it is the major fundraising event, which is a virtual choose your own adventure. So the whole premise is, you know, get out with your bubble, exercise, do anything you want that's active, just something that's for you, that's going to fill your cup and make you feel well. So please stay healthy, stay safe, and take care of yourselves. And Glenn, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.